Where are we going? Welcome to this exclusive podcast produced by Spirit Watch Ministries that will show where life in our darkening times is now turning and how you can avoid the detours of deception through the hope of biblical truth. The Lord Jesus in Matthew 24 warned us over 2 millennia ago and how urgently we need to heed him now. Our host is Pastor Rafael Martinez, a seasoned Northwest Indiana-based minister, intercessor, and counter-cult apologist who will help you discern the journey of change we're all on as the last day of the last days now winds down. For more information, check out our Facebook page and our website at spiritwatch.org. Now, here's Pastor Rafael.
Hello, I'm Rafael Martinez, a minister within the Church of God Cleveland movement and the director of Spirit Watch Ministries, a Christian outreach providing biblical discernment in a time of deception. Our podcast is called Where Are We Going? You see, the world's getting more and more complex, unpredictable, and troubling, and those are just the high points. Our society is really going off the rails as we see it, and events in Texas and Washington, D.C. are certainly reminding us of that once again. When you add into the social contracts all around us the powerful influences of cultism, abuse of religion, and the general spiritual chaos that's arisen as the Christian faith erodes and is abandoned today, it's no wonder that people are confused these days and that they ask that very question that we use to entitle our podcast. Where, they ask, are we going? Well, Spirit Watch Ministries produces these podcasts to provide solidly biblical answers to those kinds of questions, offering perspectives on our deceptive times of trouble you just won't find anywhere else. We've been seeking to provide answers about the kinds of cultism and deception that are all around that have made life that much more challenging. And we're glad you stopped in today, and we welcome all of our new listeners today. We hope you bookmark us and return again next week when we release our next podcast. They are generally released at midnight Saturday every week. It's easy to find them on the internet at our spiritwatch.org ministry website or on Facebook using the search term Spirit Watch Ministries. Links to them will be on our homepage and on our Facebook page for easy access with just a couple of mouse clicks. So bookmark us and share those links with friends, family, or your therapist, your dog groomer, and just help us build our audience. We're now on Amazon, Spotify, and Google, and we are seeking new outlets wherever we can find them. So we appreciate your spreading the word, letting people know that our podcast is currently available for download.
On today's podcast, we're going to continue making our virtual studio a place where the voices of the victimized who survived the none too gentle mercies of the punitive side of the Xenos Christian Fellowship, now calling itself the Dwell Community Church of Columbus, Ohio, be heard. And I think that's an important thing to be done. It's actually vital that those who've been silent and oppressed for so long be given the chance to do such a thing. So we've been spending all of our podcast time the past couple of months providing an alternative perspective, shall we say, of what life is like in this movement. As we've discovered, Xenos/Dwell likes to be reckoned to be on the cutting edge of Christian ministry and prides itself greatly over that. But what it really is a cutthroat hothouse of anti-Christian manipulation, where generations of young men and women have found themselves victims of a system of religion that has nothing to do with the Great Commission that Jesus called the Christian church to engage our fallen world with. You know, I've been in the ministry for just under 40 years, and I've never had a chance to really see this up close and personal a place quite like Xenos. Their claims and their posturing about being the exclusive move of God in the final days of time are echoed by innumerable other dangerous movements like the International Church to Christ, and the ironically self-titled Great Commission churches that aim squarely at college students for new members. So Xenos/Dwell is hardly original, even though it likes to pretend that it actually is. But its harm is as personal as a punch in the mouth. It has gotten away with its spiritual, emotional, and psychological cold cocking of its very own people for over 50 years with a silence that I just still don't understand. I cannot understand how a city or churches in a city can be so quiet in the presence of such evil. I have no other words to describe it, but an evil. But Dennis, Gary, no longer. I hope you're listening because I want you to know that the handwriting's on the wall and the podcasts are going to continue to air. What I've also learned is that everyone in Xenos, basically from what we've been hearing and what we've been talking to people about, everyone in Xenos is called to leadership excellence and following their own unique discipling process. Now, the Indians of the middle and the high school incubators that Xenos runs are meant to become chiefs within the Xenos movement itself, so as to make the entire movement just this huge oiled machine of self-replication. And as we've been hearing, as I said, such leaders are created by Xenos to focus on growth at all costs. And it's actually a form of godliness that, as Scripture describes in 2 Timothy 3 and 5, as a form of godliness that actually denies the sovereign power of God. Because what you see in Xenos' operation is the hand of men hammering out an organization that follows men's traditions, that turns Christ's very own mission that he's called the church to into a cult of exploitation, all in his name. And there's still people in that horrible mix in that past, though, who paid a great price to seek the truth beyond those wombs. And there are leaders who still have consciences, and such a person we're going to be speaking to today. And we've spoken to people like that all throughout, but Oliver Long is a former Xenos leader in our virtual studio today, and he's going to be sharing his own unique perspectives as someone within the leadership ranks of that movement. And Jim, I want to welcome you to our podcast. Thanks for taking the time today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be here.
All right. I'm so glad that we referred to you, that you had some things you wanted to say and get off your chest. And it's not just that. I know you're not just here to beat your chest and just sound horrible. I know you have a great burden and a great concern after we've shared about what's going on there. And so apparently, I guess Xenos was just, hopefully winding on its merry way when we started our expose on it back in December. And ever since then, things have just gotten hotter and hotter and hotter for them. What are your impressions of the expose? What's been going on the past few months in Columbus with the NBC programming and now the Daily Beast? And I mean, what have you heard from the community? What's your impression of what's going on?
Yeah, it's been unbelievably eye-opening to me. I felt like I had mentally and emotionally put this era behind myself years and years ago. And when the NBC article and expose hit, it kind of jarred me awake, jarred me back and reminded me of just a lot of, memories from the time when I was in Xenos. Since then, there's been just an incredible amount of people that have come forward and joined together and started telling their stories. And after every single story, it's insane how you look back on the similar times in your life with the eyes of an adult and really see what was going on for what it was. And I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the writers from the Daily Beast, if it weren't for the group Xenos, as it's called, if it weren't for the NBC team, if it weren't for you and many other people that have gotten together over time.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because, I've known of, as I've said in the past, I've known of Xenos's aberrancy, for lack of a better word, for a long time. But our own cult fighting, if we can use that rather clumsy word, our own contentions with Remnant Fellowship and other movements have just really kept us completely, occupied elsewhere. But but we've really felt the release to kind of address other movements now, and with the documentary series, we hope that eventually will come out. One of the first episodes we're doing will be on Xenos, and that's why we're involved. And so I'm just grateful to have a chance to finally, come in and help to get to know and understand it and see how really dangerous it is, and that there are so many people that need to truly hear more about it and get a chance to share their own stories and get healing. What have you been able to do, or what have your other people doing to kind of get beyond it? I mean, once you leave a movement like Xenos, what happens? You've been just made a robot basically all your life there. And what do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing that I've been able to do, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is just to understand that there was a problem, that there was something bad going on there, that there was just a bent on Christianity that was not healthy, and that there are things in my life that I need to work through and to get a handle on. So the first thing is kind of understanding that there's an issue. And no matter how, long I try to put it behind me, how much time passes, there's something that still needs to be looked at and focused on. And the second thing I've done is, I've gone to counseling. I've gone to a psychiatrist, and I've started to work through, some of the issues that have started to come up in my life, and it's kind of been a perfect storm. Like I said, as more people come forward and I remember more stuff, it's been more stuff to put on the table as it were, with my psychiatrist and counselor, and to say, hey, let's look at this, because I'm still carrying this. I need to work through this. So professional help is key. Xenos doesn't have the capacity to offer professional help while you're in it. They've kind of got some pseudo counselors that really lead you down the wrong path, and, understanding that, people can legitimately struggle with mental health issues, can legitimately struggle with trauma and need to work beyond those things is kind of taking me a while to get to, but, just a step in my maturation, and growth, to be able to work through that.
So one of the first things I'm sorry, I was going to say, one of the first things you said that's been really helpful you see is realize that you're not alone. This isn't your issue. I mean, and it's not your fault. You were not the bad guy. You were a good person with good people who were in a bad situation. Does that sound about right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, that was one of the things that I needed to realize is I was more depressed at that point in my life than I've ever been in my life. And I kind of thought that was who I was. And I kind of thought that was what walking with God was going to be like, that my experiences at Xenos of just abject loneliness and depression, I felt like those were part of the normal Christian experience. And unfortunately, since then, I've realized that those aren't normal at all. That's not what it's like to be walking with God. That's not what it's like to live, a really blessed life and to be surrounded by people who love you. It's the antithesis of that. Right. And helping, talking to other people and kind of reworking through some of the things that went on. Like I said, it has been, paramount to getting through it. But yeah, understanding you're not alone, is huge. There are more people who have been impacted negatively by Xenos than there are currently people in Xenos right now, and that's a fact in the Columbus area. We've got a group right now that has well over or has around 500 people in it. That's only one of the groups, and there are obviously we were just talking today. We all know many, many, many people who need to hear about the group and need to get involved and need to have a place where they can be safe and feel like their voice is heard. So, probably one of the most damning indictments on the church is the fact that, in the 20 years that I've been gone, their ministry has not expanded. They haven't been a light to the world. If anything, the lists of transgressions and the list of destruction that they've wrought on this community in Columbus has just grown exponentially. Not their growth, not their footprint, and not their ability to speak for God. So, they by their own admission, when I was involved there, I remember Dennis talking about, we were at Holden Beach, we were on a basketball court, and he said, right now we fill up this area. Next year we'll fill up this area plus that area. Then it'll be 3 areas. And then that is how we know that we're going to be successful. That's how we know that we're going to be multiplying ourselves. That's how we know we're going to become the church movement that I believe God wants us to be. And the church hasn't grown since that point. So by their own standard, at that point, they're failure.
Yeah.
They have not been successful, and they need to look at that desperately. When you guys aren't multiplying yourself and you guys don't have the power and weight of the Spirit behind you, my God, look at that. What does that mean?
Yeah, you get butts in the seats, but does that mean these are actual disciples of Jesus, or are they actually just, bit players in a drama that was created 50 years ago in a Bible study?
It's a revolving door, and they've changed their focus now from a group that was run by a lot of adult elders. They've now got a lot of college kids running the group, kids that, I was either a high school or a fellow college leader with. They run the group now because the biggest group that they have the ability to manipulate and control and to bring up and coerce are the young. They've got people in their schools.
Right.
They've got people, at Calumet, one of their middle schools. They've got kids that are, that they can put in their blowout programs, and they can put in their middle school, high school programs, and they can just funnel into the ministry. And that's honest to God where their growth is coming from.
Right.
People who are established and secure are not drawn to this church.
Right. So, but to start with, that wasn't really your experience. I mean, you told me, and I'm sure that's just the most heartrending thing to hear, but you keep hearing it over and over and over from different people in different ways, is that their experience at the end of their involvement with Xenos was filled with condemnation and self-loathing and guilt and shaming and misery and psychological issues and just all this horrible trauma of having their inner secrets about their sex life and about their emotional issues and about their personal struggles and their doubts and questions just dragged out in this supposedly purging exercise of community that's supposed to make you a better person. That's what they were traumatized by. But to begin with, where we're looking back at how you got into this, that wasn't really your experience, right? It was something that was certainly a lot more positive.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was homeschooled growing up, so I didn't have a lot of involvement with other kids my age. My parents were volunteers at a state park in southern Ohio, and we ran into a couple from Xenos. And when we got back to Columbus, as we did every fall as a high schooler, and I mean, it moves slowly. And so, like, the leader of they called it their blowout, like their middle school was, at the time I was there, was Mark Johnson. And he was, that quintessential charismatic leader. He was goofy, he was fun, he was cool, everybody looked up to him. He was a musician, he was, pretty much a stand-up comedian. I mean, he was a hilarious guy. Yeah, exactly. And as a little kid, you're looking at him and you're like, man, this guy's really, really cool. Yeah. This guy, and then you go out to your first meeting, right? He comes and he picks you up, cause you're a kid, you don't have a car, right? And your parents and that's an insidious way, like, your parents don't need to be involved. They don't need to drop you off. I'll come get you, right? We'll make it easy on the parents, but in a way that immediately cuts your ties to your parents just on a very, very small level right off the bat. Like, oh, he'll come get you. Oh, that's cool. Mark's going to come get you, no big deal. So he would come to your house. He would talk to you. You felt like you were $1 million. Like, I cannot believe this leader in Xenos, right? We go out to this blowout ministry thing. There's several hundred middle schoolers, and the leader of this is coming to get me. The leader of this is like, quote, investing in me, spending time with me. He's telling me that he's going to be teaching tonight and what he's teaching about and what do I think about this? It's just an amazing thing. And so they get you that way. And then as you start kind of, you spend a little bit more time there, you find out, well, we might be 300 of the same kids, right? Same age group, but some of these kids are given, kind of cool things to do that the other kids aren't because, they're spiritual, right? They're more focused, like they're more devoted. And those things can be as simple as going down to the McDonald's and filling up the cooler with ice. Wow, they get to help, serve the group by, getting a cooler filled of, ice for all, just so they can cool off all the drinks, and they can help set up stuff beforehand. And man, Mark has keys, but I can go with him and help, get everything ready and not only, be more devoted and be more, servant-like by doing that. So they start to get you kind of in this mindset where you're doing what it is they want you to do, just on a very, very topical level. But because of that, you're given so much encouragement, and you're set apart from the others, right? Because you're on their God squad, or you get called on to stand up and pray before the meeting starts, and you get a shot to do whatever. So they ask you to give your testimony at the teaching, that sort of thing. So that stuff starts in middle school. And it just starts on a very, very minute level with very simple tasks, but those simple tasks set you apart and get you a ton of encouragement from people you think are, really, really cool and really have it going on. And then as you kind of go into high school, you find out like, oh man, Mark lives in a ministry house on campus, right? He lives with these other guys. And, for me, when I was in high school, I was homeschooled through high school, so I didn't have a lot of involvement with other kids my age. So my involvement became, Mark. I would hang out, with his roommates, right? I would hang out with Aaron Phelps, and I would go. Aaron would be like, "Hey, let's go to a movie tonight," and that sort of thing. So you get to do all this stuff you weren't normally doing. And stay up past your bedtime, and your parents are fine because, these are guys with the church and whatever, and they're good influences, and it's keeping you out of trouble and whatnot, and, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and then you can crash over at their house, you can spend weekends there, and it's, wow, all 7 of these guys are, devoted and living their life for God. And, so you start, as you start becoming more involved and more aware of what's going on, you start to see Xenos gave these people a place to live. Xenos gave these guys a job. Xenos gave these guys the foundation to serve and to move God's kingdom forward. And if I do what I'm supposed to be doing here, and they're going to tell me, it's not only let's go get ice now, it's, hey, why don't you come, 15 minutes earlier to my place and we'll pray before the meeting, or we'll, why don't you spend some extra time at the meeting talking to this person or doing, so they start to, guide you into like these things, and they're not all necessarily bad, but they're all ways where you do what you're supposed to do, and they're the ones deciding what you're supposed to be doing, right? And, ministry houses, I was introduced to that at an early age. They go to this place, or they went to this place called Holden Beach every year. I went there as a high schooler twice. My parents let me go with the college kids, right? And that's where you really get involved in the sense that, like, man, these guys are so cool. They all smoke, they drink, they let me drink. They all stay up to all hours of the night. They are the authority, and they're cool. They're just like me. They're not like having the adults around or whatever. It really is. When I had my first opportunity to move into a house, it was a no-brainer. Like, I got my parents to give permission. I don't even know if they were asked to give permission, but I moved into a ministry house as a minor. Just because it was a no-brainer. If I want to live my life for God, I need to move into a house, and because I'm not going to be as effective outside of a house, and I can learn more, and I can be involved with people who are similarly focused, and all of that jazz.
What was the line of reasoning they would use on you to make you feel like you can't go anywhere else to be effective, to be truly faithful to God, except within the context of the Xenos culture?
So that's not necessarily brought up to you directly, right? Because I was a Columbus kid. I was a kid that I wasn't going to school, right? I didn't have any athletic scholarships. I wasn't, brilliant. I didn't have, scholarship offer from anywhere else, because of like what I was doing in high school. Like, I was homeschooled. Like, I was kind of like a no risk to leave type person, right? I grew up on campus in Victorian Village. That was my home. That was where my family was. It wasn't like I was, a kid who had just started going to school there from out of state or anything like that. So I wasn't a risk to leave. So I wasn't pulled aside and said, well, hey, you might want to sacrifice this opportunity because I think God wants you here, right? Because I didn't have those opportunities as a kid. I was kind of, a nobody. But what I did see, though, is them pull aside other kids, right? So, so-and-so, has a chance to go down to Bowling Green and go to school. Well, shoot, Mark and I would, and Aaron and I would pray about this kid choosing not to go to school at Bowling Green and to choose to go to school in Columbus so that he could stay involved. Because we did not want him to be out by himself on college because of the temptations there without his brothers, right? We wanted him in a ministry house. We were convinced that God wanted him here, so they wouldn't necessarily tell me like, hey, here's the rationale for why you need to stay local. But we would get really involved with other kids who were, and flight risk is too much of a statement, but who did have the chance and the opportunity to go elsewhere. And, it would be like, okay, this kid plays football for Ohio State. He's never going to start because he's not necessarily good enough, but Mount Union has offered him a full scholarship. But we don't want him to go there because he would leave here and he would be, out on his own and that sort of thing. So we would weigh in with him. And then the kids that would leave, it was like, oh my God, they walked away from God, right? They left God, they are pursuing a life in the world. Why would they want to do this? So I didn't have like the same arguments landed on me, but I very much became aware, and that's how they do a lot of things, right? You kind of see what not to do, right? You're not like directly encouraged to go do X, Y, and Z, right? But they make it known that you should go do X, Y, and Z because they spend so much time emphasizing what they don't want you to do, right? So there's only really one path left, right? Go live in a ministry house, attend all the meetings, and pick a school that's close, and pick a study that will make you more effective for the Lord, make you a better evangelist, more effective. So
at what point then did they? I understand it's an incremental thing. Nobody directly tells you, but at what were there points in which mentors or disciplers would just come alongside some idealistic young man or woman with dreams and passions, and they're unpacking themselves to the disciples, talking about what they want to do with their lives. Is there at some point where it starts to become suggested, like I said, that they might consider
absolutely.
That very path, but even though, like you said, it's been something that's been implicitly impressed upon them all during the time
That's a good
there.
way to put it.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
So
yes. So my friend.
I guess that's my question.
Yeah, so
when does it become explicit?
Okay, so usually when you're more in the high school to college age, because you're out from under your parents, they don't necessarily have the same say. Then you start seeing the conversations about, like I worked for my dad, for instance, and I worked for my dad because he gave me flexible hours, and I could work a couple hours a week and then spend the rest of my time discipling people and working at the or meeting people at the coffee shop and doing what I thought was ministry, right? So even then, they didn't like him providing me a paycheck. So I got conversations about how, they pulled up scripture and they said, if your father, your mom and dad don't do X, Y, and Z, like I forget what scripture he used. But I remember like it was yesterday, the conversation was basically like, they're not living their life for God.
Yeah.
And they're not, they have too much control over you because they control your paycheck, right? So you need to figure something else out, and you need to stop spending your time and most of your time around them, right? Because part of what you need to be doing is working somewhere where you can, bring people out to meetings, right? You're not going to do that, you and your dad, going and cutting grass or doing landscaping, right? You're only going to do that if you go work at, the coffee shop or whatever with people your own age that you can get to know and meet, evangelize to, right? So they were very much like they weighed in immediately regarding my relationship with my parents. Were extremely and hostil's probably too much of a word, but Nate was the guy who discipled me in college, was very much like threatened, right, by how involved my parents were in my life, and he did not like that one bit. So yeah, he would immediately start to weigh in about how much time I was spending at my parents' place. He would start to weigh in about me working for the family business and not going out and getting what job he wanted me to get.
This was your discipler, right?
Yes, absolutely. So he was very much in my ear about that and would rebuke me. That was when I would start getting like formally rebuked and stuff was, on that. And I'll have to find the passage that he pulled out of context, but it was basically like something about like the end times and mothers and fathers are turned against their kids, and made it sound like I was at a point of choosing in my life where I needed to either choose the church or my family, right? So, of course I chose the church and, did what I was supposed to be doing and started spending a lot less time with my family and working a lot and all of that stuff. I started to take out loans to pay my bills rather than, work at the family summers and that sort of thing. So that was regarding where they started to expressly get involved and, kind of cut that tie to people that are like your support group outside of the church, right?
Right.
We would also do stuff where, and this happened in college too, where, Calvin was this kid who was going down to school in Southern Ohio, and we would pull him aside, like flipping every meeting. Hey, have you thought about staying, close? Have you thought about moving into a ministry house? Have you thought about transferring up here? Have you thought about, and when he finally made the decision, like, no, like I've got a good setup down here. Oh my gosh, it was like we all went into mourning. This guy's an hour and a half away, but to us, it was like he was 30 million miles away from what God wanted him to do, and he had turned his back. so we would weigh in about where he went to school. This guy in my house named Jason was pursuing an engineering degree, and it was getting really, really time intensive, right? So there was never a question in any of our minds about, hey, this guy might really be able to do a lot of cool stuff for God with an engineering degree.
Yeah.
It was more like, this guy can't come to this. He can't, and he would come to the meetings, but he can't go to the quote ministry events after the meetings, and stay up until all hours of the night ministering to people and doing that sort of thing. So we would encourage him to quit that stuff. And this was a kid that he was the son of one of the elders of the church at the time. So he was not, to us, he was not even devoted enough. And he came from a family that was, super devoted in the eyes of the church. But yeah, because of what he was pursuing and the time it was taking away from what we wanted him to do, absolutely, we would
there's absolutely no concept then, and that what you're saying is that within Xenos, there's absolutely no concept, no notion, no consideration, no appreciation, no actual acknowledgement that a person can leave the community and go off to the school, or even go to the church and be viewed as somehow suspect.
Absolutely.
Absolutely as an apostate of some sort, somebody who's abandoning God in some way. They just cannot conceive that someone can actually still love and serve God but not be a part of Xenos. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And that would I cannot list the amount of both direct and indirect, conversations that would occur because things would be as direct as taking their leadership classes. And one of our homework assignments would be to go to 5 other churches, right? And go there for one meeting and then write about everything that they did that wasn't according to God's will, that wasn't devoted, that wasn't as militantly into, what God wanted to do in the greater Columbus area. And we would go and we would write criticism. So we were trained from an early age through their servanthood classes, through their leadership classes, through their Christian principle classes. We were trained at an early age that Xenos was the one way, and that all of and it wasn't even like, hey, if you go to Vineyard in Columbus, they kind of have a good thing going. You're not necessarily going to see what we're talking about there. Maybe spend your time going somewhere. No, it was choose any other church other than Xenos, and you're going to go in and you're going to answer these questions and you're going to criticize them and fill out what they're doing incorrectly and how they're not biblical and how they're, living their lives apart from what God would really want. Basically how they're lukewarm Christians, right? So, so people not only who were like, hey, I feel called to go join this ministry or, go do whatever, those people would have the direct conversations with them about why they were wrong. But then everybody else the people who were aware that those conversations were happening and that, Calvin turned his back on God today, right? People who knew that stuff was going on would then have the indirect assignments that would still imprint in their minds, go take your Christian principles class and then come back and tell me why all these other churches are trash and why Xenos is the way, the truth, and the life. So it was they kind of hit you both ways. They hit you indirectly. Fundy Christians, that was one thing we threw around a lot. Orthodoxy, there was a constant mocking about anything that was going on outside of Xenos, as being just kind of a joke and, that sort of thing.
Was there
it was very deliberate.
Tell us a little more, Oliver, about as I said, Xenos prides itself on making everybody there putting everybody there within its homeschool and all that it does to actually prime people to become leaders. Mm-hmm. So if everyone is meant to be, everyone's striving to be, everyone's striving to become to arrive at this level of maturity. Mm-hmm. And at what level did you rise to? What you were actually called a leader over that? What level? In other words, as we've called it in the career path of Xenos, what level of leadership were you at?
Yeah, so around 15 and 16, I started just helping out with the high school group. When I got to college, I started helping out with the high school group as a college leader. As a high school leader from the college group.
Okay.
Now that lasted for a year or two, and then I left the church for a small period of time, started getting counseling, started to try to work through some of the issues that being involved was bringing up, started going back to the church again, and then I think I was still involved with high school ministry. I was still a high school leader at that point. Then I think I was a college cell group leader, and then I was a college home group leader.
Okay. So what's above that? Explain it to us a little more. Okay, yeah, Xenos' hierarchy. Where do you go from there?
Exactly. So it's all based on like the smallest denomination, right? Is the individual discipleship relationship, right? So each individual person believes that they need to duplicate themselves as many times as possible, right? That's the way you're going to get exponential growth in your group. So you start by discipling somebody, and then if you start to build a ministry, your work gets acknowledged, and you're given the ability to co-lead a cell group with fellow people your own gender. If you're successful at that, you'll be raised up to home church leadership, which is like a small home group of around 45 people, both guys and girls. And you'll lead that. If you're successful at that and you successfully duplicate not only your individual discipleship relationships, but if you duplicate cell groups and you duplicate your home church, then you'll be acknowledged for your good works, and you'll become a sphere leader or an elder, and that's kind of the next step up. Is to continue to propagate your ministry. That way, it's all numerical. It's all about getting as many people as possible and multiplying your effects down through them, and then in turn having them bring in their own people. So it's somewhat of a pyramid scheme, kind of how it's designed.
Right. You were living in a ministry house and they kicked you out how did you actually leave? Did you actually walk away, or were you cast away? Which was it?
It was one of those things where I left because. So it was like a leave or get kicked out type of thing, right? So I was a ministry house leader, cell group leader, and home church leader, and was, unbelievably depressed and lonely in my life, right? And I could not figure out why everything that Xenos had promised me my life would be was not coming true, right? So it was crazy moment. Like the girl that they had directed me to date, that relationship had gone down in flames, right? The person I co-led the ministry with, she had gotten married, and her husband had decided he was threatened by our relationship and didn't want us to hang out. And so I didn't feel any support or anything like that as a leader. There were several other things that went on that summer where I literally got to the point where, like, when I would put together a teaching, I couldn't figure out what God wanted me to teach on, couldn't figure out, couldn't get a burden. They called it a burden, right? So so I would just walk around at night until all hours of the night just trying to find God and trying to find what his specific message that he wanted to convey to my group through me was. And it was just silent. I mean, everything was silence. Everything was very much alone. And I had, the woman I led with, that's who I was telling you about, the other night, is, we had designed our ministry to be different. Even though we were in Xenos, we wanted to be different from what Xenos was doing, right? So we knew a lot of the stuff that was going on with the dating, and we did not want that to be the experience of the people in our group. We knew what was going on with like the schools and stuff, and just the pressure that were being put on these kids, you know. And we wanted people to develop their own burdens and develop their own idea for what it was, you know, God was leading them to do, right? So we were very much against kind of the top-down direction, right? Like I remember, like I taught a lot on, you know, I'm just as lost and alone as you guys, right? We're all trying to figure this out together, how to walk with God, how to love other people. And what we're being called to do as ministers is ultimately impossible, right? You know, we're literally changing or working in conjunction with God's Spirit to change eternity in a person's heart. And that's a tall order. That's an impossible order. And that's something that should both put us in awe and also, you know, make us feel very underqualified, right, for what we're being. So it was so antithetical to this is what you should do, this is what God is doing, this is black and white. It was very much like, no, this is a relationship, guys, and there's room for doubt, there's room for fear, there's room for loneliness, right? There's room for all of these things that go on in life that are part of the human condition, right? Because Xenos is very big on like, hey, you know, if you have any of this, like, yeah, God will meet you, you know, Christ will meet you on the road and say, okay, Thomas, you know, put your fingers in, you know, the nail holes, right? He'll give you, but you don't want it to get to that point where he has to like prove himself to you. Like have the faith of a mustard seed for God's sake, you know, right? So they were very black and white as that this is God's will, this is his path, and this is the road you should be on, right? We were very much against that. And when things started to fall apart, and I started to feel even more like, you know, God, I am out on a flippin' island here. I got these 12 guys looking to me to lead them, and I can't even lead myself, right? I thought I was supposed to marry this girl, and this relationship is gone. I thought I was to lead. I came back, you know, I had left the church for a while, several years before that. I came back to the church to co-lead with this woman, Meg, because she had basically brought me back, and that was falling apart. That relationship was falling apart. She was the one that I felt like, man, she gets it. She gets how enormous this task is. She gets how she gets all of these things that this church doesn't get and doesn't teach. And when that relationship started to fall apart, one of the guys I was closest to in the house, he had gotten married and moved out. I mean, there were a lot of things that kind of like came together, and I literally and figuratively, you know, I fell apart. You know, my school started to suffer, even the classes that I was, you know, already doing kind of the bare minimum in, that started to suffer. My ministry started to suffer. I couldn't figure out what it was I was supposed to be doing in my life. I didn't have any clear direction, and things just didn't feel like they were working out. And it was just a very, it was like a culmination of so many things, and just a very like lost moment in my life. And like the people I would go to for help, right? I would go to like the counselors at Xenos. And I would be like, okay, you know, so well, how do I make this work? Like, what am I doing wrong here? Like, tell me what to do to make this all right. And you're getting the same, kind of crap that you would get if you went to, like, I went to the dentist at one point to ask for advice, on what was going on. I went to my fellow leaders and that sort of thing. I was not getting anywhere as to why it was I would go into a meeting and teach that this is the body of Christ. These are the closest relationships. This is what being in this group will provide you in your life that you have never had or experienced before. Why I would go in and say that out of one side of my mouth and then go home alone and feel utterly abjectly like by myself and not have any sort of that experience, I would just, it was just, that dichotomy was just mind blowing to me. And it was just like, I'm lying to everybody. I'm lying to everybody about a life I haven't even been able to lead or have myself, but yet I'm promising every person I'm bringing around that, you're going to live life and live it abundantly. Like, this is the best life you can live here in a fallen world, is by joining this church and being a part of things here. And when it didn't seem like that was the case anymore, or my experience didn't line up with that, once that wasn't the reality, God, everything started to crumble, literally crumble in everything I was doing. So like my discipleship relationships, those were falling apart, right? Because, guys would come to me for advice and for leading, and I would say, I don't know, right? I don't know. Like, and that was the thing. The way that we were told to present things, there should have been no room for doubt, right? We had it all figured out, right? We, as a 24, 25-year-old person, like, I should have had it nailed down. But, I would say, I don't know either. So, wait a second. How don't you know? Right? You're the one who's supposed to be leading me. So those would fall, those were starting to fall apart. Like my teachings, I taught probably, oh my goodness, I taught at least once a week, sometimes 3 times a week. My teachings would not have the same passion. Exactly. They just didn't carry the same weight, same passion. So the results, right? Xenos will always say like, well, we're not a group based on numbers, right? We're based on the quality of people's walks with God, not the quantity. Now they're very much based on numbers, right? Mm. They wanted to be a super church. They wanted to be, they've been hovering church, right? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We want to be a church planting movement, right? We want to be part of this movement. We want to be the next great thing, right? Come to our servanthood classes, close your eyes, and if you're committed, you need to stand up now type deal. So, I didn't have the results anymore, right? I was the charismatic, passionate person that was compelling everybody to, move into the house or join the home church or come out to meetings, and that's right. So my results weren't there.
So you were starting to lose. Were there members that you were ministering to finally leaving?
So nobody left until after I left. So after I left, I think everybody in the ministry house left. The home church was disbanded. And I think a handful of people are still in fellowship at Xenos right now. But it basically just crumbled, because after I left, then it was the leader that was sent in there to kind of, clean things up. It was back to the black and white, you do this, don't do that. And I had spent so much time trying to instill personal responsibility in each of the guys to make choices on their own, right? When somebody started to come in there and say, don't smoke in the house, or don't smoke on the porch, you need to go smoke in your car, or, you need to have a curfew of 10 o'clock, or you need to be, you're not in school, so I'm going to kick you out of the house, right? You're not attending classes, or it was basically like, if you're not doing X, Y, and Z, here's the criteria, type thing, you're gone. And most of the guys ended up, over the next months and couple of years, probably maybe only a year, but a year or two, ended up leaving, shortly after that. And it was only then that we reconnected, right? Because when you're in the church, you're not allowed to be in contact with people who are outside the church. So they would sneak me over, and I would hang out with them and stuff, because I really loved them. So they would sneak me over, and we would still have like a friendship relationship and that sort of thing.
That's sad. When you can't even have decent relationships, and that's understandable.
Yeah. When it was, I remember when I was living in my car, one of the guys that was still in the house, like, he couldn't sneak me into the house in the middle of winter when it was cold and there was like 2 feet of snow on the ground. But he's like, oh my God, he's going to die in this car. So he came to where I was living, pulled me out of the car in the middle of the night and took me to his parents' house, right? So I could have like a warm place to sleep, in the middle of winter and stuff. But there was, they weren't allowed to have any involvement with me. It was one of those things that was like completely, shunned. It wasn't that, man, this is a struggling brother that we need to shore up. Or even on the other side of things, like, this is something that went terribly wrong here and we need to figure out what went wrong, or whatever. It was basically like, nah, you failed, you haven't made the cut, and you're toast. And, just didn't, I still look back on that and I wish at some point in the time I was at Xenos, I wish somebody had said, maybe you have a chemical imbalance, or maybe you need to go to a professional and seek professional help with some of these things. It wasn't until after I was gone from Xenos that I finally, it broke down the stigma, like mental health and that sort of thing. Like, if you have mental health in Xenos, you're not following God, right? Or mental health issues or that sort of thing. You're not following God properly, right? And if you need a chemical to make you feel good about your relationship with God and what you're doing here on earth, oh my gosh, like, you're basically drugging yourself to have an experience, and how much can you trust that experience to actually be authentic, right? So any sort of like medication, prescriptions, work with a real therapist, work with a psychiatrist, all of that stuff, extremely, extremely frowned upon. It was only until after I was out where I said, my God, maybe, right, the counselor in Xenos who I went to for 3 years, they didn't help me. None of the other leaders helped me figure things out, why it was that things were going this way. Maybe I am really depressed. Maybe I do have a chemical issue that's outside of my control. Maybe I do have things from my past I need to work through. Maybe I don't have it all together like I thought I did. It was only then that, I started to, started to get stable. I met Linnea. I started to see a psychiatrist. I got on some just really mild, like Zoloft, whatever, did wonders for me. Started to get, stable, moved into a house with a couple guys in college, started to go back to school, for a real degree and all that.
How long after you left from Xenos was it until you
I started to take some Zoloft. I don't remember when I actually got prescribed. And I had a doctor's appointment a few months ago. I thought about actually asking him, like, okay, based on my chart, when did I start taking this, right? Because it gets so, that time period in my life is just so flippin' blurry.
Oliver, you stated you were struggling greatly with depression while in Xenos. Now, was that a clinical diagnosis referring to an actual chemical imbalance and an illness you're struggling with, or was that something that was actually diagnosed by actual psychiatrists and medical doctors?
Now, so I was going to a counselor within Xenos, and I did not receive any sort of diagnosis. A lot of my issues, feeling lonely, feeling depressed, not being able to sleep, racing thoughts, anxiety, that sort of thing, were all kind of chalked up to, not trusting God or not walking with God in the way that I should, right? Because you're in the body of Christ, you shouldn't feel lonely. You're surrounded by people who love you. You should not feel unloved. You have a ministry. You shouldn't feel like you are purposeless, right? You should believe your identity in Christ. You shouldn't necessarily try to figure out like who you are, what you like, and who you are individually. So yeah, I was never diagnosed by anybody within Xenos. I was referred to a psychiatrist at the time who completely went overboard and she was in Xenos. She diagnosed me as bipolar and schizophrenic and several other things and put me on just an incredibly destructive amount of drugs, right? I basically felt numb. And I can remember going back to my counselor in Xenos and saying, my God, if this is what life is going to be, if this is how I'm to become healthy, by not feeling anything and being completely numb to the world, I don't know necessarily if I want that, right? So she misdiagnosed me. And it wasn't until several years after that I finally got to see, a real psychiatrist, and they said, you're depressed, you're stressed out, you're trying to grow up, you're trying to deal with responsibilities, you're failing for the first time in your life. And they put me on a mild dose of Zoloft, and it flippin' changed my life. It was unbelievable. I think 0.25 milligrams of Zoloft, and I was a changed person. That's how little it took. Just the kind of two-handed thing. First, having it understood that you're not alone. Other people struggle with depression, and it's not something that you should be ashamed of or feel like is sin. And then the second thing was, you have a chemical issue, right? You got an imbalance that we need to figure out and work out. And once that happened, I've been completely stable and consistent ever since.
Right. So,
and I never would have had that healing if I was in the church.
Right.
I was continuing to try to figure out what the hell was wrong with me. I'd stay up all night. I would hike all around the city on foot. I'd hop on trains. I did just an incredible amount of stuff. I'd go down to Calumet and run the bleachers until I was exhausted. I did so many things to try to figure out why I was the way that I was and why things weren't working for me in the way that other people convinced me that they were working for them. And at the end of the day, it's like, there weren't any adults in the room. There was not anybody who was able to make a suggestion that actually would have benefited me. The answer was always more work, more responsibility, get higher and higher in the church, and continue to sacrifice and devote your life to your ministry, and everything will work out. And that, that's not the case. It really isn't.
So the stigma of besetting psychological or emotional problems in Xenos is a very real thing. It sounds to me that that's something that is inflicted upon those who struggle, and I would guess that in a place like that, those who struggled that way were just moved ahead and are moving ahead even today because they can hide it. in the most cunning way they possibly can.
Absolutely. And I was able to hide it for a long time because I was very, very good at kind of plowing forward, right? I was very good at school, very successful at school. I was very good at ministry. I was very good at bringing people around. I was very good at teaching. I was very good socially. There were a lot of things I was able to do where people would think, oh my gosh, this is a successful person, right? He's, leading a group that's doing well. He's got several disciples. He's got people in the pipeline that he's evangelizing to. But at the end of the day, like I said, I felt fake. I felt lost, and I felt alone. And when I would go to teachings where they would say things like, they would promise you what it was like to live Christ and to live that abundant life, right? It was not my experience there. My experience was discipling a couple of people, being successful, and then having them split away from you and not having those friends anymore. My experience was the more success you have, the more alone you're going to get because, you'll continue to grow, develop, duplicate yourself and send out your own little missionaries to go and do the same thing, right?
And that's
all these people that you love and invest in.
Right, and that's supposed to be what Christian community was according to Xenos in the New Testament. That's the way Christianity was meant to be understood.
When you talk about the Great Commission, go forth and make disciples of all nations, right? There's that aspect of, going out and, spreading the good news, speaking, preaching about Christ and what his crucifixion means. But at the end of the day, that's only possible within the, when you live Christ and live that abundant life, right? When you see the blessings of the Christian community, when you see those little miracles every day in your life, when you see things that are authentically the hand of God at work, that's the only thing that gives those acts the ability to it gives you the passion, gives you the conviction, gives you the faith to work out to literally work out your faith in that regard. When you see those authentic things. And the frustrating thing is, the thing that I kept fighting for in Xenos and didn't feel or didn't see with my own eyes was what was authentic, right? Every single person that told me, I love you, I want to invest in you, I have a burden for you. The day I walked out the door, not one of them at all ever called me up, ever reached out to me, ever said, hey, how's it going? These are people that said, you're my brother. I'd lay down my life for you. And I would always look at them and say, nah, I don't think you believe that. Because the minute I'm not doing what you want me to do, or the minute I'm not successful in producing what you want me to produce, our relationship is as good as dead. And it didn't feel real, and it wasn't real. Those people have never picked up the phone and dialed my number. I have one person that has remained in contact with me that's still in that church. Only one person out of the scores and scores of people I served with, fellow leaders, people I discipled, people I was in groups with, only one person. That's how they, that's literally how they punish you when you leave. While you're there, you question whether it's real. When you leave, you find out it's not real. They really didn't have that connection to you, that relationship, that burden and passion to be involved in your life.
Yeah. Right.
Because why would you ever kick somebody out of your life that failed? I mean, failure is part of the human condition.
Right. And that's certainly something that a lot of people, of course, are testifying to, is that, Xenos/Dwell says they're so full of love for people, and yet they actually prove just the opposite by what they do. I want to read a little bit here from the Daily Beast response that Dwell put out here, and I'm going to pick up. Maybe you can piggyback some of what we've been talking about here. They wrote, over the last 2 months, and this is from the Daily Beast article, which they quote, and then James Rockford, giving the official response, chimes in. Over the last 2 months, the Daily Beast interviewed 25 former Dwell followers whose membership spans nearly 4 decades. While the details of their experiences differed, the result was the same. Dwell, they said, was a church that drew them in when they were young or lonely, showered them with attention and compliments, and quickly turned dark. And of course, James Rockford goes on to say, well, this is a highly cynical interpretation of relational love. Jesus said, love one another just as I have loved you. If people at Dwell were cold and unwelcoming, our dark motives would be eliminated, but so would our love. This is truly a no-win scenario. If you show love, this is for the purpose of manipulation and pressure. But if you don't show love, then you're welcoming and cold. What do you respond to that? I mean, I got my own views, but what would you say to his own rather dismissive comment here?
I discipled a young man named Casey Lewis, and I, honest to God, don't even know if he's alive at this point. He was excommunicated. But before he was excommunicated, he pulled me aside and he told me something that I will always remember. He said, Oliver, he said, I lost something in my life when you stopped investing in me, when you stopped picking me up for meetings, right? When you stopped, going out of your way to talk to me, when you stopped getting together with me and studying with me. He said, once that love, that outpouring of love and investment stopped, because at that point he was living in the ministry house, he was going to cell group, he was taking Christian principle classes, and he was attending the home church CT and prayer meetings, right? He was doing what he was supposed to be doing. He said, once that love stopped, man, he was destitute, and alone. And he said something was gone from his life. And that's the Xenos strategy. You bring those people in, and my God, you make them feel like they're the most important person on the face of the earth, right? You would get in your car and I would get in my car and drive 45 minutes to go pick him up, one way, just to go get him, right? Come back, and he would hang out with us. He had a place on the couch to crash when he needed to. And we would just show him that level of love and investment, and commitment, and communicate to him that he had value, he had a place there. This is where God wanted him in his life. And then it was all gone. Then it was time for Casey to figure out those things on his own. And it was time for Casey to deal with some of his past demons on his own. And it was time for Casey to grow up. And you're talking about a 19-year-old kid here. It's time for him to grow up. And his life collapsed without that support and that commitment and that investment. And that happens to a lot of people in Xenos. Once you come in, every time when I wasn't that involved, every time I would show up, I'd get hugs from like 15 different people, but then after a while, you're old news and you're expected to be on the other side of that. Right. So it's amazing. If you're bringing people out, they're a project and they can do no wrong. And every time they pray, you're sitting next to them. Amen, brother. Amen. Their praying is the most edifying thing you've ever heard. Every time they speak up at a meeting, oh my gosh, what you said tonight, that was unbelievable, right? Every time that, you guys drive them home, you're having these conversations with them about their life and their future and what God wants. Those are the most amazing moments, and then it disappears. And, for Casey, that's what happened. The love ran out and it was time to produce, and he was not, due to a lot of past demons, he was not able to produce. at that point in his life. And Xenos doesn't have the ability to handle people that don't produce what they want to produce, right? Like I was able to produce and multiply myself, no problem. I was able to bring a ton of people around. I was able to disciple them. I was able to be successful according to their standards. Xenos does not know how to handle people who aren't in a place emotionally, mentally, physically, whatever, where they can do that. And they won't invest in them. You know, they're the low-hanging fruit, man. Why wouldn't you rather spend your time going after somebody who would be more effective long-term than this person who has an alcohol problem, this person who, you know, might relapse into drugs, this person who, you know, comes from a really bad childhood and that sort of thing. Like the very people that Jesus Christ hung out with, Xenos does not hang out with because their utility is not the same as what they would think of as a more effective instrument in God's hands. So, you know, and that was what happened to Casey. And once the love ran out, his walk with God, which was very fragile to begin with, you know, didn't have the legs to stand, and the wind blew it away. And I have no idea where he is now. He's dropped off the face of the earth, and I will always think of that conversation I had with him, and I will always think of excommunicating him and what that did to his life, and what the rejection from the church did.
So he was excommunicated. So
yeah,
that was something you had to do.
Yes, we had to excommunicate him because of his drinking, right? We found out that he would go upstairs in the attic and he would drink and watch He loved the Steelers football team. So he would go up in the attic and he would drink and he would watch the Steelers play football. And, you know, we wanted, once again, I mean, you know, we're flipping kids. We were so ready to diagnose him as an alcoholic, and for all intents and purposes, he may have been. But we never sent him to get help. We never sent him to a professional. We never gave him any tools to work on that sort of thing. It was basically like, you know, why have you been doing this? You need to repent. You need to grow your walk with God. You need to do X, Y, and Z. Why aren't you doing these things? We were so ready to lay the hammer down because he wasn't producing what we thought he should be, that we never looked at him as a person, loved him for who he was, and flaws and all, understood the flaws, and thought to ourselves, my God, maybe this issue is outside of our ability to deal with. Maybe we need to get professional help here. Maybe we need to go with him to an AA meeting. Maybe we need to see if he can be officially diagnosed as having a dependency issue. We never did. We never did. And, you know, that's one of the problems in the group is, as leaders, we were also all too ready to look at things black and white, to make split judgment decisions on literally where a person's heart was. We were making decisions on just the eternal nature of somebody's soul, right? Things that I look back on and just make me shudder. You know, that I'm deciding how this person feels. I'm deciding what this person's relationship is like with God, how deep it is, how committed they are, right? Whether they're not in this for the long, like I'm weighing and evaluating things on an eternal nature, right? Nobody should ever be doing that. And if you are doing that, you should have just an abundance of humility and deference to the leading of the Spirit, and not walk so blindly and callously through it. But, you know, that's the problem. You know, when you're young and very naive and you're brought up too quickly and you're being asked things that you don't know what the eternal importance of them are.
Right.
You know, you make a lot of really poor decisions, and I think we did with him. I think we did with other people we excommunicated, kicked out, other people that we would quote unquote polarize, other people that when they would show up, we would just, hey, if this person shows up to a meeting, all we're to do is talk to them about their relationship with their girlfriend and whether or not they're going to break that up. If this person shows up, all we're to do is talk to them about whether or not they've decided to come to school in Columbus. right? Those were the conversations. There was no room for mystery. There was no room for the leading of the Spirit. We knew and were convinced and acted accordingly in the lives of tons of people, and it was very hard-handed and callous and way too confident. Way too confident. Like, who are we to decide that somebody shouldn't go to Bowling Green? Who are we to tell somebody, that they should lose weight before they teach, because nobody will take them seriously? Who are we to tell people how to dress? Who are we to tell people that the person they're dating, they're not equally yoked to that person? Like, who are we to tell somebody that the fruits in their life don't amount to anything and we can't see the Spirit of the Lord working through them? Like, who are we to tell people we know where their heart is before God? It's insane to me. But that's what Xenos is. Xenos controls everything. Everything from, the weight that you carry on your body. They have a special way that they dress. At least they did in the college group. They have certain vocations that are appropriate to spend your time investing in. They have certain places that are appropriate to get jobs at. They definitely have ideas of where you should live. They control who you date. They control whether you lead, whether you're successful there, whether you get a disciple. I mean, you could bring around a person and get ready to disciple them, and the leader of your group, who hasn't brought around anybody ever, could say, no, I'll disciple him. I need a disciple, and take your quote unquote fruit in ministry away from you. But they control everything, down to just the minutest detail. And they don't see that. And they say, well, we never tell people that they shouldn't, that they should or shouldn't do these things. Well, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Because, when a kid goes to check out the college group, you pull everybody aside and say, hey, there are flight risks to go to another school out of state, and they can't do that because God clearly wants them here. Right? So they decide where you go to school. They decide what you learn. Like I was telling you, there's a guy who had an engineering degree, or was pursuing an engineering degree. That was too time intensive. Right? God doesn't want you to do that. God wants you to invest in ministry. You're not going to be successful that way.
Right.
We put a lot of pressure on him. Every aspect of a person's life was not off limits. It was not private. Even the married couples. How's your sex life? What are you doing? What are you not doing? Like, there's no room for privacy. There's no room for an individual relationship with God. All of the convictions that you have, like say somebody wants to send money to the Red Cross, or to be, involved with United Way, or to go down to a food pantry. No. Like, have you thought about going to this ministry that Xenos is involved in? So your convictions, the leading from your Spirit, no, that can be judged. That can be open to discussion, and they will not. They have no qualms about being involved in a person's life. Their finances, how much they tithe, absolutely not. Nothing is off limits. Nothing is sacred, and no room is given for the person themselves to stand before God individually and do things according to the leading of the Spirit in their life and according to their own convictions. And that's someday Xenos is going to answer for that. Because the same things that made me think this is not real, this is contrived, this is controlled, this is manipulated, this is a machine. The same things that made me feel that way are the things that they put in place. Who's on the decision continuum? How can we manipulate them into getting more committed? What's their personality like? Are they a phlegmatic, choleric, sanguine, or I forget the other one?
That's the personality test that we were talking
absolutely
about.
Breaking people down to the viscosity of their blood. This idea, this pseudo-psychological idea, is based upon finding the best ways to manipulate and get what you want out of a person.
Right.
And, oh my God,
Yeah.
if I felt like things were fake there as just a kid, I guarantee you people even there now are struggling with the same feeling.
Sure. Absolutely. And, again, it stems back to the verse that I quoted at the start of our discussion in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 5 through 7, where Paul is writing about false teachers. He says, they have a form of godliness, but deny its power.
Mm-hmm.
And from such people we're to turn away. For he goes on to say, of this sort are those who creep into households, house churches, ministry houses. I think of that when I hear that word. And they make captives of gullible women, and I think is certainly a case for men as well, who are loaded down with their own sins and led away by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth.
That's right.
That's to me is Xenos in a heartbeat right there, and just a quick biblical snapshot. And I think that's something that we certainly need to keep bringing more light upon. And I really appreciate you spending time with us today. And we're wrapping it up here. But I wanted to ask you, as in a closing part here, what might you say to those who are leading Xenos Dwell, who I know are going to be listening to this, they're going to be analyzing? I'm sure every bit of what we're going to say is going to be a focus group somewhere, probably behind closed doors. What would you say to those who are leading it, are listening, about the ongoing furor? And what message would you like to send to them? And finally, what would you like to say to anyone who may still be there, who you remember, that you'd like to maybe just give a personal reverie to?
Well, twofold. First, I would just issue a warning. I'd say be so careful, because you do not know what you're doing. All right. I really believe that these people have a level of deception that's even clouded their own judgment. And I don't know and won't speak to where people's individual convictions are and whether or not this is a power trip or self-aggrandizing or a messiah complex that they're working out. But I would say to those people who do want to follow God, be so careful, because what you're doing in the lives of other people around you is so damaging. Ultimately, it is so unbelievably damaging. You need to leave room for God. You need to leave room for the leading of the Spirit. You need to leave room for people to develop their own personal convictions. You need people to be able to develop their own faith and act that out. They're not a cog in the machine. They're not valuable because they've discipled 5 people and planted 2 home churches. They're not useful to you because they're articulate and they can teach well. These people are people that we all pray have their names written in the book of life. And these are people that are loved by the all-powerful God of the universe. And what you are doing with this machine and this systemic approach, this manipulative authoritarian approach to their life is builds a barrier between them and God. And I know that's not God's desire for them. And unfortunately, it creates a mass of people that when Dennis opines about people who decide not to go to the prayer meeting but decide to do a cell group retreat, and he makes a joke about, well, they did that without my green light. Man, like, there's no room there for them to be led by the Spirit, unfortunately. And when you sit and you laugh in unison and mock people that are led by the Spirit, but just didn't do what you thought they should do, and they shirked the home group's, prayer group, and they went out and prayed in the woods instead. Like, my God, you're limiting God. You're limiting his ability to lead people directly. And ultimately, you're limiting your impact on earth. And I just want, like I said at the start of this, by their own admission, they have no light to the world. Their lampstands covered up. God has taken their ability to reach people. And even now you have Dennis saying, well, it's a blessing that we haven't gotten, notoriety from, that we haven't, developed a big name for ourselves, that we haven't, been known on a, national level. And I'm thinking like, that's not a blessing from God. That's an indication that you're not successful. That's an indication that you're not being used.
Yeah.
That's an indication that you don't have a church planting movement, that you haven't started a revolution, that God himself has not stood behind you, not in Columbus, not in Ohio, and definitely not in the nation. That idea that we will grow exponentially from 2,500 to 5,000 to 7,000 to 25,000. It never happened, Dennis, and you need to understand why it didn't happen and take that out and look at it. It's because all of your classes, all of your training, all of your involvement in people's lives to the point where they don't have lives, has affected God's desire to get in and get behind and bless your church. And that's why the attendance is the exact same level now that it was 20 years ago. In the same way that they would come to me as a leader and say, well, where's your fruit? Let's point that back on them. Where's your fruit, guys? Like, you spent 20 years going to 5 meetings a week. You spent 20 years kicking out people, and having a revolving door where you bring in high schoolers, middle schoolers, college kids, and then kick out disaffected, jaded people that hate religion and hate God. Like, sooner or later, man, take a look at yourselves and hopefully, the delusion, and the amount of just, hopefully people will wake up, and see that kind of stuff.
And I believe
that's my prayer.
Yeah, and I believe it's accelerating. I thank God for the work that has gone on way before I ever got here. People like Mark Kennedy's website, xenosisacult.com, and Katie's Rediker's new one was Dwell Community Church is a cult.com. I hope that's right. It's still so.
I think it is.
That's a hot mouthful. Hey, there's people coming forward. And the silence is breaking, and I hope by all indications that that the message is being made very clear to Dwell. It's not going away. It's going to get a lot louder, and the ride's going to get a lot more bumpier. And as we've said, the Apostle Paul's warning us to turn away from such places where you can be bewitched and led away and by leaders who compel your lives to be led a certain way within the context of households full of people that are just led astray and are turned into a part of a mechanism to manipulate you. I really hope and pray people start seeing that. And I think they have. And I think the fact that we're able to see that's being certainly noticed by the media more, and that it's encouraging. And this is before even the documentary that we went there for to get started hasn't even aired yet. We haven't even got that going yet. So we're looking forward to that. And we will certainly be hoping to get an update on that pretty soon. But again, I really want to thank you, Oliver, for the time. It's been a incredibly eye-opening thing to continually hear about. And I want to thank you once again for the opportunity to share it. And I will, we'll be having you back. We have a special project we're working on, and we'll tell you a little more about that in the next couple episodes. But thank you once again for coming in.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. And like I said, I mean, it's because of the work that you're doing, the work that some of these websites and the people that have created them, some of the support groups that have gone up. It's because of that I've been able in the past couple of years to actually look back on, address, and start to move forward from a time in my life where I was just, like I said, very lonely, very depressed, very manipulated, and ultimately I was very suicidal. So it's because of the work that people are doing that I don't have to block it out. I don't have to look back on it longingly. I don't have to make it into something it's not. I can look back on it as an adult in my involvement there, see it very clearly and objectively for what it was, address it, own up to it, and then move forward from it. So,
right.
Yeah, that's what healing is.
That's it.
And
that's right.
Because of what you guys have done, I can look at that time in my life and
that's
hopefully
great.
help other people to do the same.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that, Oliver. I really am, because that's really what it's all about. Our concern is to see people living, personal, uplifting, authentic, Christian life, and we see so many spiritual counterfeits, so many pretensive false teachers and leaders doing just the opposite. And if we can do something that helps pull that back in some way in someone's life and enable people to see a little brighter and to look up instead of looking always down, then we've done our job. And I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And we're going to keep at it. We're not stopping now. No matter what goes on, we're going to keep on pressing, and we've only just begun, as the old song says. Thank you once again, Oliver, and I appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening today as we explore just where are we going. Our prayer is that you have been encouraged and strengthened, and if necessary, challenged in your daily journey through life. Jesus is coming. You can fall with the night, or you can rise with the sun. The choice is yours. You can email us with questions and comments at feedback@spiritwatch.org. And if you need urgent personal spiritual help, email us at help@spiritwatch.org. We look forward to hearing from you. Please follow our podcasting at our Facebook page and our website at spiritwatch.org. This podcast is a production of Spirit Watch Ministries, taking heed that no man deceives you.